Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my week number 12 wide receiver top 36 rankings and tiers for the 2024 fantasy football season. But before we go in depth to my top 36 wide receiver rankings and tiers for week number 12 of the 2024 fantasy football season, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 12 top 36 wide receiver rankings and tiers for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with the no-brainer wide receiver ones tier with my wide receivers 1 through 6. At number 1, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. Amon-Ra St. Brown is on fire this season. He has scored a touchdown now in every single game outside of the first two. 10 total touchdowns on the season. Last week, he put belt to ass up against the Jaguars with 39 PPR points. This week, in a wet dream matchup up against the Indianapolis Colts, I expect him to put up yet another huge performance. At number 2, we have A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the L.A. Rams in L.A. on Sunday Night Football. Now, the last 2 weeks, we have seen a little bit of a cool down for A.J. Brown compared to what we are used to from earlier on in the season. But when it comes to A.J. Brown, it would appear that Devontae Smith is not going to play in this game, which lends the hand towards A.J. Brown getting even more targets, being the clear number 1 on this team. And A.J. Brown going up against a Rams defense in a game that could be a firefight, a very high-scoring back-and-forth affair. I think A.J. Brown finishes with his best finish on the season. At number 3, we have Justin Jefferson of the cold-like Minnesota Vikings going up against the Chicago Bears. Now, just like A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson's been on a bit of a skid. Wide receiver 27 and 32 over the last 2 games, but prior to that, he was the wide receiver 9, 11, and 5. Prior to the bye week, he's currently the wide receiver 3 on the season. We know why we like Justin Jefferson, because he's Justin Jefferson. I get the Bears matchup isn't the easiest one on earth, but Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. You're going to rank him this high. Next up, we got Nico Collins of the Houston Texans going up against the Tennessee Titans at home in Houston. Now, Nico Collins did get screwed last week by the fact that Tunsil ended up being an illegal man downfield, wiping off his touchdown, which would have been a huge play early on in the game for the Texans. And then ultimately, Joe Mixon ended up being the first guy to score. And while that did hurt like a butt cheek on his stick, Nico Collins wasn't fully integrated into the offense. He didn't get his full allotment of snaps, and as the season keeps going and trucking on, and as he gets healthier and healthier, then the snaps are going to go up. Ultimately, Nico Collins is so good, even if he gets just a slight increase in snaps up against the Titans, I expect a huge showing. Next up, we got Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins going up against the New England Patriots at home in Miami. Now, last week was the first week on the season outside of week 1 where he was a top 12 wide receiver, and I was so excited to see that because I was banging the drum so heavily for Tyreek Hill in the summer. I was giving him the Suka Lamink special, metaphorically, of course. And then he obviously ended up as a colossal bust from weeks 2 all the way up until week 9. Week 10, he was a little bit better, but last week in week 11 is when the monkey truly jumped off of his back, going up against the Patriots defense. I think this is yet another top 12 game. Final guy inside of the top tier here is Terry McLaurin of the Left Hands Up. Who are we? The Commanders going up against the Dallas Cowboys at home in Washington. Now, last week, Terry McLaurin got locked up, don't let me out, by Quinyon Mitchell. He got put on Guantanamo Bay, and he didn't do anything. When Quinyon Mitchell was on him, he didn't get a single target. But he did end up scoring 2 fantasy points because once Mitchell left him to go elsewhere, he was able to get a catch. Now, this week, he's not going to have to be facing that. Prior to last week, where obviously he shit the bed, he had a bunch of games in a row as a top 24 wide receiver 15, 21, 18, 16, and 5 over the last 5 games. So no need to worry about Terry McLaurin. No need to panic about Jaden Stormy Daniels. This is a clear get-right game for this Commanders offense. Next up, we move on into the second tier here, the slightly lower tier, no-brainer wide receiver 1s, and we're to start off here with wide receivers 7 and 8, the Rams, Puka Nacua, and Cooper Kupp, both going up against the Eagles on Sunday Night Football. Now, Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp both might get locked up, just like Terry McLaurin, by Quinyon Mitchell. Now, there's a chance that Mitchell rotates from one to the other. Like, oh, I locked Puka up. Let me go to Cooper Kupp. And then Cooper Kupp gets locked up and Puka Nacua is eating, and vice versa. There's a chance that he just says, you know what? I'm going one-on-one in the Thunderdome. Me versus Puka, and Puka's getting canceled out. Me versus Kupp, and Kupp's getting canceled out. This guy has locked up so many stud wide receivers this season. I'm not trying to glaze him. I'm not trying to say this is the next fucking Revis Island, but it's very, very scary. So while I'm still playing Puka, while I'm still playing Cooper Kupp, you have to acknowledge that there is a lot more risk this week, but ultimately one of them is probably going to have a humongous showing. At number 9, we got Malik Neighbors of the Giants going up against the Buccaneers. This is a great spot for him. Now, the quarterback change from Danny Dimes to Tommy DeVito is going to potentially throw a wrench into things. Now, it might make things slightly better, it might make things slightly worse, or maybe it's the exact same. Ultimately, Tommy DeVito is competent enough to force feed the ball down the throat of Malik Neighbors around 8+ times. This is a guy that has seen 18 targets in a game this season, 15 targets, 13 targets. So while he hasn't been as effective as of recently, maybe the quarterback change shakes things up. Plus, this is one of the best matchups he could have. Next up, to close out the top 10 here, we got Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens going up against the LA Chargers in LA. Now, back-to-back games on the struggle bus for Zay Flowers. He did end up finding the end zone last week, but the fact that he dropped a pass that hit him right in between the titties where chicks get those like tattoos, and you know, if you're fucking a chick that has like some crazy tattoo in between her tatas, that chick's crazy. But Zay Flowers going up against the LA Chargers is a fine matchup. I'm not going to say this is the best matchup, but we did just see Jamar Chase, Joe Shiesty go bananas in that game. So Zay Flowers should be able to play a lot better. He has been pretty inconsistent, but the upside is far too high to have him ranked any lower than this. Now we move on into the third tier. Now, some people might be like, Nick, if you actually do the math, you would notice that you have 10 guys in the first 2 tiers. So technically, some of these guys in the third tier aren't wide receiver 2s. Well, I get that, but for the sake of the video, there's a drop down from the slightly lower tier no-brainer wide receiver 1s to the wide receiver 2s. So we begin with CeeDee Lamb here, wide receiver 11, going up against the Commanders in Washington. Now, CeeDee Lamb is currently questionable, dealing with a back injury, probably from carrying the Dallas Cowboys offense. He did return to practice on Friday, so I don't really think that's something to worry about. Now, CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 15 last week. The week prior, he was the wide receiver 40. It really just kind of depends which version of Cooper Rush we get. Now, both versions of Cooper Rush were far from ideal. The last week was much better than what we saw up against the Eagles. Ultimately, the Commanders' defense isn't very good, and CeeDee Lamb should be able to get like 10+ targets. So while I'm not very excited to rank him inside the top 12, the fact that so many teams are on bye is what gets him up here. Next up, we got Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos going up against the Las Vegas Raiders in Viva Las Vegas. Now, Courtland Sutton was on fire, NBA Jam style, wide receiver 6 in week 10, wide receiver 6 in week 9. Last week, he was the wide receiver 26 up against the Falcons, but still had a good game. Bo Nix has been playing out of his mind and going up against a Raiders defense that is bottom of the barrel, bottom of the shelf, like some Wolf Schmidt vodka. I fully expect Courtland Sutton to be able to bounce back and have a clear top 20 game. Next up, we got Mike Evans, the Bucs, going up against the Giants in MetLife. Now, the question about Mike Evans is, how healthy truly is he? He missed week 8. He missed week 9. He missed week 10. Then they had the bye week in week 11, and he's back this week. He obviously missed a lot of time with that hamstring injury. So the question is he fully Mike Evans? But in a week where there are 6 teams on bye, and with a guy like Mike Evans, I'm just going to throw him out there to the Wolves. Now, could this be a very bad game out of Mike Evans? Definitely, but the fact that Godwin is hurt, Mike Evans is baked into the wide receiver 1 role. Baker Mayfield has been playing incredible this season, so I do expect a big game out of Mike Evans, even if he is coming into the game banged up, because this matchup against the Giants is finger-licking good. Next up, we got JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba, going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, JSN, another one of these receivers that's just incredibly hot, no diddy here. Wide receiver 9 last week, then the bye week, then wide receiver 1. Now, DK Metcalf is back, but JSN saw 11 or more targets in back-to-back games, and Metcalf was back last week with 11 targets, 10 receptions, 110 yards, for JSN. Now, it feels like they're phasing back Lockett and increasing the workload of JSN. I hope that's the case going forward, because if it is, I feel as though with the ability that JSN possesses, this is a guy that could be a locked and loaded top 24 wide receiver week in and week out. Next up, we got Jennings of the 49ers going up against the Packers in Green Bay. Back-to-back games inside the top 16, and while everyone loves to just play with the nutsack of Deebo Samuel, play with his nuts like a fushigi, I really think Jennings is the guy in this offense. Deebo's a great player, but he is as inconsistent as it gets. He's like fucking Aaron Judge in the playoffs. He turns into Aaron Fudge, right? Deebo Samuel is very hit or miss. He could easily score 30 points here. He might just score 5 points up against the Packers. Brock Purdy has been playing very well. It appears he should be good to go in this game. So Jennings up against the Packers. While this isn't the best matchup on earth, when you've been playing as well as Jennings, we stay in the fire, we stay in the flame, and we keep banging the drum for him. Next up, we got wide receiver number 15 here, or number 16 here. It's going to be DK Metcalf of the Seahawks going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, DK Metcalf is a lot like Deebo Samuel. He is very hit or miss. Now, DK Metcalf is built like a Greek god. He's built like he was chiseled out of a statue. He's incredibly fast. He's fucking huge. Now, I'm not trying to just suck this guy off, metaphorically, of course, but he's really good. But he never really has been consistent. Last week, he was 7 of 9 for 70 yards. So if they continue to kind of pace back Lockett's amount of touches per game, then Metcalf and JSN could both be very reliable. This is a game that has the makings of a potential shootout, and while there is risk with Metcalf, ultimately, how can you rank him lower than this? Next up, we got Ladd McConkey, another guy that is banged up. He did not practice on Thursday with the shoulder injury, so that is something to monitor today. When I'm recording today's video, the news has not been released. When you're watching it, the news might already be out. If Ladd McConkey is out, then Quentin Johnston is going to move up from, he is in the high-end wide receiver 2 tier. Or the high-end wide receiver 3 tier. He is going to move up into the low-end wide receiver 2 tier. So Ladd McConkey's the clear wide receiver 1 on this team. This guy's real gritty. He's been a great player. He was the wide receiver 16 last week. He played well up against the Bengals, 6 of 9 for 123 yards. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, and going up against another AFC North opponent with a not-so-hot defense. In another primetime game, with how Herbert's been playing, with how much the offense has been percolating, I think Ladd deserves a spot as a wide receiver 2 going forward. Next up, we move into the low-end wide receiver 2s, headlined by Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, I am a big fan of Marvin Harrison Jr. I was talking up Marvin Harrison Jr. all summer long, like that Kid Rock song, right? And some people believed with me, some people didn't believe me, and ultimately, I shouldn't have been as high, but he has looked good, but he has been incredibly inconsistent. The highs are incredibly high, the lows are in the fucking basement with games with 0 fantasy points, 1 fantasy point. Now, his last game out prior to the bye, he was the wide receiver 14. Kyler has been playing incredibly well over the last 3 games ever since Black Ops 6 released. And if Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler are this elite connection, I believe they are, while the risk is there, which is bumping him down from being a wide receiver 2 to a low-end wide receiver 2, I still think you want Marvin Harrison Jr. in your lineup. Next up, we got Deebo Samuel. Now, we already talked about the risk, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet here. The upside is too damn high to sit him. But again, there are very clear risks. Last week, the motherfucker only scored 6 fantasy points. Next up, we got DeAndre Hopkins going up against the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. This kind of feels like a get-right game for the Chiefs offense. They did not play very well at all up against the Bills in Buffalo. D-Hop had his worst game as a Kansas City Chief, scoring just 6 fantasy points. Again, this really does feel like the game where he gets things right, where the offense looks better, where Patrick Mahomes plays better, and D-Hop should end up being a low-end wide receiver 2. Next up, we got Calvin Ridley, former teammate of DeAndre Hopkins. Now, Calvin Ridley did end up getting his nuke of a touchdown called back from Will Levis, which sucked. He scored just 10 fantasy points. The game prior, he was the wide receiver 3, the wide receiver 30, and the wide receiver 5. He's played a pattern of dominant and then not so hot. So with him being not so hot last week, you would think up against the Texans, he's going to kick in the door, FBI open up style. I don't love this spot up against the Texans, but with Will Levis playing better, With D-Hop out of town, Calvin Ridley is just destined to get a bunch of targets. Next up, we got Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts going up against the Detroit Lions. Another matchup that I don't really like. But Anthony Richardson really shattered the mold up against the Jets, right? I was someone that was talking about how Anthony Richardson cannot keep Josh Downs reliable. Josh Downs is going to be very hit or miss, but it appears that the benching of Anthony Richardson made him actually play a lot better. Now, am I going to completely just buy 100% into that narrative because Downs was the wide receiver 11 and because Anthony Richardson beat the ever-living shit out of the New York Jets? He curb stomped their ass. That's going to happen again up against the Lions. Probably not, but they're going to be down in the game. They're going to have to throw a ton. And to me, Josh Downs is the guy in this offense. So I can't bang the drum too high because of the matchup and because I don't want to just get diddled because I believed in a one-game sample size, but I do believe in the talent of Josh Downs. Next up, we got Jaden Riley-Reed of the Green Bay Packers going up against the 49ers at home in Green Bay. Wide receiver 42 last week scored a touchdown early on in the game up against the Bears, but then did his best John Cena impression because he was invisible for the rest of the game. Going up against the 49ers, I've read that this game might be snowy, but based upon what I'm looking at right now, that doesn't really appear to be the case. This could be a very high-scoring game. Jaden Reed is very boom or bust. A lot of these guys in this tier, you basically could have just named it the boom or bust tier. It's hard to sit them, but they love the other wide receivers as well. Jordan Love likes to spread the ball around. He's like, Oprah, you get the ball, you get the ball, you all get the ball. Check under your seat because the ball is underneath you as well. Watching. Pause. Jaden Reed going up against the 49ers. There's always risk with him, but he kind of just always ends up being in your lineup. Final guy here, the wide receiver number 24, is going to be Jameson Williams of the Lions going up against the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. We talked about this in the wide receiver start sit video. Early on the season, Jameson Williams was sucking in targets like his name was Lisa Ann, 9 and 11. Then after that, 3, 2, 4, 1. Then he gets suspended and he comes back to 5 and 6. If he's getting 5 or 6 a week, I'm going to have to trust him a little bit more. I still wish he wasn't just getting 4 or 5 a game. I wish he was getting 7 because then you can really rely on him. He's a high upside play. Again, the upside was amazing last week, and it came to fruition as the wide receiver 8. The week prior, he was the wide receiver 41. The matchup here up against the Colts, though, is too voluptuous for me to rank him any lower. Next up, we move on into the high-end wide receiver 3s tier here, beginning with Quentin Johnston of the LA Chargers going up against the Baltimore Ravens at home in LA on Monday Night Football. Now, Quentin Johnston really isn't this target hog that Ladd McConkey is, and Quentin Johnston still does struggle from sometimes where you know he should catch the ball and he just drops it for some reason. He has a big case of just fucking forgetting how to use his hands. But, and this is a big but, shout out to Violet Myers. He has scored a touchdown now in 3 straight games. This could be a shootout up against the Ravens. So while I definitely trust Ladd McConkey more, if Ladd McConkey misses, again, we're bumping up Quentin Johnston. Next up, we got Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders going up against the Denver Broncos. Now, he might get locked up, don't let me out, by Patrick Surtain. This is a game where they're going to be trailing to the Broncos. They're going to have to throw a ton. Jacoby Myers had his worst game as of recent up against the Dolphins last week. He's pretty good at getting like 12-plus points a game. Prior to last week against the Dolphins, he had 19 points against the Bengals, 17 up against the Chiefs. So while no one should sit here and talk about how much they love Gardner Minshew, and while no one should sit here and be like, Jacoby Myers is the second coming of fucking Randy Moss, he is talented enough to get it done. Final guy in this tier is going to be Tank Dell, going up against the Tennessee Titans, the computer man himself. Now, I do strongly believe that the fact that Nico Collins is back is going to add a lot more safety to Tank Dell. He is not the prototypical wide receiver 1. With Diggs out, he was not successful in that role. But as the number 2, when the defenses are so worried about Nico Collins, I think that does make me feel better about Tank Dell. Now, what I talked about didn't end up happening last week as he was just the wide receiver 41, but I think there are brighter days ahead for Mr. Tank Dell. Next up, we move into the wide receiver 3s tier here with DJ Moore going up against the cold like Minnesota Vikings heading things off. But before we talk about this tier and the final tier at the wide receiver position, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends, our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog and sign up using promo code Notorious, you will get a free pick, which tonight is going to be LeBron James, higher than half a total point. You match that with any other player playing in the NBA or in the NFL, and if both of your picks hit, you'll receive 3 times your entry. If you put in other picks, obviously they all have to hit, but you'll receive a higher payout. Plus, not only do you get the free pick, you also get a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash if you're watching this after this game was already played with LeBron James. If you're watching on Saturday, it'll be a different NBA player higher than half a total point. Or if you're watching on Sunday, it's going to be an NFL player higher than half a total point. So make sure you guys check that out. Promo code Notorious, or by clicking on the link in the video description to get your free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Now, I trust DJ Moore just about as far as I could throw him, right? I don't think that anyone should be trustworthy of DJ Moore based upon the quarterback play of Caleb Williams this season and the matchup up against the Vikings. Now, technically, the Vikings defense is a little bit fugazi, so DJ Moore could succeed, but just one game of Shane Waldron getting canned and then the offense percolating some more doesn't magically mean now that everything is fucking fixed. The Bears are back. Let's suck them off, this, that, and the other thing. But again, when we're in a week with so many teams on bye, DJ Moore gets ranked this high, not because I love DJ Moore, but because there's so many teams on bye. Speaking of so many teams on bye, Jalen waddled away, waddle, till the very next day going up against the Patriots. Now, who in the right mind wants to play Jalen Waddle? The answer is absolutely nobody. No one wants to play Jalen Waddle. The last time he scored over 10 fantasy points was in week number 1, which feels like a fortnight ago at this point in the season. Now, going up against the Patriots is a fine matchup, but with so many pass-catching opportunities going to Jonnu Smith, with so many going to Tyreek, with so many going to Devon Achane, it feels like even though Jalen Waddle got paid the mega bucks, the mega millions, Jalen Waddle isn't involved very much in this offense. So while I can't sit here and pretend like he's a safe bet, eventually he's going to have a great game because he's Jalen Waddle and he's a great receiver. The question is, when is it ever going to actually fucking happen? Next up, we got Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson is like wrapping a condom around your team with Daniel Jones under center. He gets his 8+ targets basically every single game. Now, normally he doesn't score a touchdown. He only has 2 touchdowns on the season, but he's going to catch a lot of passes. He's going to put up your 10 to 12 fantasy points, and you get out of there feeling okay with it. Can that continue with Tommy DeVito is a question. It could get worse. It could get better. I don't ever envision Wan'Dale Robinson being a guy that scores 10 touchdowns in a season, but as long as he gets the volume, he's going to be okay. Next up, we got Jordan Addison-Ray, wide receiver of the Minnesota Vikings, going up against the Bears in Chicago. Jordan Addison's another one of these guys that's just like the classic hit or miss wide receiver, except for when you compare him to a guy like Jameson Williams, maybe you think Jordan Addison's a more talented player. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you about that because I think that's a fine argument to be made. But, and this is a big but, shout out to, let's go with Phoenix Marie here. Jordan Addison he's not on an offense like the Lions. He's on the fucking Vikings with Stafford, with Sam Darnold. So it's a much different take on things. The upside is still very significant, right? We saw a top 24 game. We've seen multiple top 24 games this season. But we've also seen games as the wide receiver 61, 55, 81, 62. So I can't rank him any higher. Next up, we got Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, the Packers boys, going up against the 49ers. Now, Watson was the benefactor last week. When Reed didn't have the best game, Watson was dominant, 50 Shades of Grey style, wide receiver 13. 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 150 yards. Who was the non-benefactor of that? Romeo Doubs, who was down in the gutters fucking begging for some money on the street in a box, right? Wide receiver 85. Doubs, Watson, both get a lot of snaps. They're both talented players. Like I said, Jordan Love does the you get the ball, you all get the ball. They've got a lot of mouths to feed, but this could be a high-scoring game, so they're both fine. But one of these guys, one of Watson, Doubs, and Reed, are basically guaranteed to bust unless this is the fucking shootout of the century, or it's like the Lions offense where you get a touchdown, you all get a touchdown, but we all know that's not how the Packers offense is. Final tier here is the flex tier, beginning with Demario Douglas of the Patriots going up against the Dolphins in the 305. Demario Douglas is good enough to get you 10 fantasy points, and that's really it. He could be going up against Jalen Ramsey, so he could end up getting absolutely put in a jail cell in this game. But Drake May's been looking better. Demario Douglas is going to get his 5+ targets. He has the upside to get 9 or more. No one's going to talk very kindly about Demario Douglas, and I'm not going to either. I thought he would have a better season, but if Drake May keeps playing fine, Douglas will be okay. Next up is Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is one of those glass cannon type of guys, right? Another one of these guys, I could see him scoring literally 30 fantasy points here. I could see him scoring -1. He scored -1 points up against the Bucks a couple of weeks ago, 17 points last week as the wide receiver 21. Can you do something to me? Or can you do something to me? Pause. That's a little suspect. Can you do something for me? Shout out 21 Savage, right? So the matchup here is good for the taking, but this won't be a back and forth affair. This is probably going to be a beatdown, a smackdown, brother, WWF. So I don't think the Chiefs are going to have to throw the ball a crazy amount to where Xavier Worthy will be as likely to get lucky like that Robin Thicke song at the end of the night and score a touchdown. Next up, we got Roma Dunze. I love Roma Dunze. I talked him up a bunch in the summer. I think the guy's incredibly talented. His college tape made me oogle and ogle. It had me bricked up underneath my desk watching it. Let's call a spade a spade. When Caleb Williams is playing like shit, when Caleb Williams hasn't thrown a touchdown since fucking October, and it's almost December, what can I tell you about really hyping up about Odunze up against the Vikings? He had 10 targets last week. If he gets that again, he should be fine. Next up, we got Michael Pittman Jr. This guy's been hurt for what feels like the whole entire season. He's been dealing with a million different injuries. He's like the, what's that game called where you like do like the surgery with your finger? You know what I'm talking about? Like where you like grab the things out and the guy, it's like a kid's game, and the guy, there's like this chubby guy and he's on the table and you like take things out, right? That's how many injuries that fucking Michael Pittman Jr. has. I don't love it. I like Josh Downs a lot more, but he should be able to get his 6+ targets and be okay. Next guy here is Ricky Pearsall. 50 Cent, he got shot, but he's still breathing, going up against the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau. Ricky Pearsall had 2 targets last week for 0 catches. The week prior, he was the wide receiver 13. The targets aren't guaranteed here, but he should be able to get like 3 or 4, and that should be fine enough to finish here. Final guy is Keenan Allen, the Unk. Keenan Allen does low-key still have it. He's not as washed up as I thought he would be, but again, when Caleb Williams is sucking more cock out there playing football than Mia Malkova, how can I truly bang the drum and get super excited about any of these Bears players? Thank you guys all so much for watching. If you didn't enjoy, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. And make sure you check out Underdog. Promo code Notorious to get your free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I love you more than you'll ever know. I hope you have a great one. And as always, good boy!